Hey guys, we were here to talk about Luke Cage, the latest in the Netflix/Marvel series we're getting. Every few months we've gotten a new one, or at least a new season of one. We've seen the first 7 episodes, but this will be a spoiler-free conversation, so overall impressions and thoughts, but we're not going to give away any big twists or anything like that. So Terri, is a long-awaited show, not just because we've gotten the other Netflix shows, because Luke Cage as a character has been around since the 70s, has his own fan base. What do you think, having seen these first 7?
Yeah, it's really interesting because he's the one character of these shows so far who we've met already. We spend a good deal of time with Luke in Jessica Jones, and I thought, okay, this is a character who I have some awareness of. And what I love about this show most is that it does something completely different with him. It does feel like you're getting Luke at a different point in his life, and a very different, important chapter of his life. And I think stylistically, it just feels really fresh and different and sets itself apart. And Jessica Jones is a superhero where her name is her identity, but it's not like she's out there on the street doing these heroic deeds that many people are seeing. But like Luke Cage is Luke Cage. Luke Cage, the superhero who you hear about, that's just him as an identity. And I think that's something really interesting that the show explores or starts to explore in what we've seen so far.
Yeah, I liked it from the start, but it took me a few episodes to realize I was loving it.
Same.
Because at first, it's a good show right from the start, but Daredevil had the benefit of being first, right, of these Netflix shows, so that was super exciting and it was great. And then Jessica Jones had such a sort of heavy, deep, and well done look at like a very big deal thing with her trauma, with a sexual assault.
The hook in that first episode when she turns around, decides to stay,
right,
is such a good hook to a first episode that I didn't feel this show necessarily had.
Because Luke is more of a traditional reluctant hero figure, right? Because it does begin with him trying to live a normal life. I don't think it's a spoiler to say, guys, he's not going to just live a normal life for these 13 episodes. He will get involved.
And then he just keeps sweeping that barbershop.
Yeah, and he's just like, I'm ignoring all the crime. So it's a little more traditional coming off of Jessica, but yeah, it's vibe, it's feel, and the characters really start to pull you in. And I do think it benefits from the binge model because you watch the first one, you're like, that's good, and then you watch a few and you're like, okay, I'm really getting into this.
Something that really struck me about the first episode is that Luke is not the most compelling character in that episode. The two main villains that we spend a lot of time with are Cottonmouth and Mariah Dillard, and they're cousins here. And Cottonmouth is like the leader. He clearly views himself as the king of crime in Harlem.
Crime boss.
Yes, and then his cousin is Mariah, and she's trying to be a councilwoman and do things right, but she keeps needing to lean on him for his money and support, and sort of tries to ignore the bad things he's doing to give her that support. And they're really well done, complex characters that it's not like Kingpin was also like that, and same with Purple Man, Kilgrave, but here everyone is sort of aware of each other pretty early on, and that's really interesting to see how they're very street level and grounded characters trying to deal with each other and the threats that they pose to each other.
Yeah, that's actually one of my favorite dynamics is those two villains and the fact that she's a politician, he's a crime boss. They're cousins, but it's really more of a sibling relationship.
Right.
They were kind of raised like siblings, and they're two great actors, but it's also two very interesting characters bouncing off each other because it's a complicated dynamic between them, and the fact that they don't necessarily approve of everything the other's doing, but there is the familial background between them. And I thought that was a really great thing that pulled me in. One thing that I will say that the show sort of has to overcome is the fact that, and some of it's probably budgetary, this is not a world filled with super villains yet. And so there is a lot of Luke Cage being shot and bullets don't affect him. But I think they try to sort of work around that and see how they deal with that as a plot point when you don't want the hero to have too many experiences that seem the same.
Yeah, it's interesting because he's not a ninja like Daredevil, and Jessica Jones, I know a lot of people sort of criticize the fight scenes in Jessica Jones, but Luke Cage is more similar to her in that he's all brute force. And you're right, he'll walk through, he'll get shot at by a bunch of people and just sort of shrug his shoulders. That said, there is a really cool fight scene in the first 7 that we've seen. I don't want to point out a specific episode, but one that I was like, oh, this is a really cool use of his powers and how you sort of have that, power man identity, really showing that come through when Luke Cage wants to get something done, how simple it can be with the abilities he has against very normal guns and weaponry and
Yeah.
fists.
I want to say again, I won't get into specifics, but there are nice nods to the comics, to his history, to his look, and the music's great. They definitely acknowledge the fact that this character came out of the 1970s and was sort of very much a blaxploitation-driven character and reflecting those kind of movies. So while the character is contemporary and behaves contemporary, there's these nods to it, and the music especially, the vibe of it. I thought that was really cool.
Yeah, it's something like you were right where Jessica Jones, right out the gate, you get the noir sensibilities of this show. And it took me a couple episodes to really get what the feel and the vibe of Luke Cage would be. But it does feel unlike anything that I've seen Marvel produce. And I think that's very much a testament to the showrunner, Joe Cocker, putting his stamp on it and taking these influences, but also spinning it into something that stands on its own.
Yeah.
And in between, not only like the visual aesthetic, the way music is used, which is, not only the soundtrack, but also in the episodes in the series itself, it's really important. Really just the idea of Luke being a superhero where his identity is his superhero identity is really interesting to me, and I think that they start to explore that in ways that, like, I keep saying you wouldn't see Tony, everyone knows Tony Stark as Iron Man, but you wouldn't see him walking down the streets of New York City and dealing with everyday life and going to get a coffee, but that's something that these street level shows, these Netflix shows do allow you to do, and I think that they're really taking advantage of that in ways that I find interesting, even though we've seen so many different versions of these superheroes already from Marvel.
By the way, you just made me think of one thing I loved about this show, because it was a pet peeve of mine in Daredevil and Jessica Jones, which is they name drop some of the other superheroes that exist in the Marvel Cinematic Universe, and they don't say the green guy. They actually name drop a couple of direct superheroes. I was like, okay, good. It just felt like a weird thing in those two other shows where they're like, we're kind of going to mention them, but not.
Yeah.
So, but yeah, I really like that this show has its own vibe. I think that's really a great thing about all three of the shows we've gotten so far. Yes, you could say dark is like a vibe to all of them, and they definitely go the language and sort of the thematic and places they go and things they do are definitely darker than the movies, but they still feel like their own thing. They just don't feel like carbon copies of each other.
One thing I do want to say, because I went into this, I loved Jessica Jones so much.
Yeah.
I don't know if you can tell by how many times I've brought it up,
Right.
but it just like totally worked for me, and I connected with it really well. And coming off of that and being so connected with her, I was hoping that Luke Cage would pick up a little bit more as a continuation of his journey from there. But you don't, like, there are a couple of references to the time he spent before this show, but Jessica Jones is not a very important character in his life in the context.
In the first half.
Yeah, in the context of what we've seen, it's much more concerned about exploring like his relationship with his ex-wife, also, or late wife, I should say, not ex-wife, which we saw parts of that in Jessica Jones. So that was something that I was taken aback a little bit at first by, but then when I went back and watched it again, it worked so much better for the show. So that's fair warning. Don't expect this to be a Jessica Jones sequel. It's very much its own show.
Yeah, if you didn't see Jessica Jones, actually, this works perfectly well,
Right.
I think. Yeah. So those are overall thoughts. I think we both, I have to say, feel the same as far as like it'll really grab you a few episodes in. I think it really starts
Yeah,
to
maybe
get
not the very first episode, but by 3, 4, you'll be like, oh, I get what this show is. And we've only seen 7. And I was like, I want 8.
Yeah. So we have to wait. September 30th. That's when they all will be on Netflix. We'll be watching. But for plenty more on Luke Cage and all things Netflix and all things Marvel, keep it here at IGN.